Monday morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome back to our Canvas family members. I'm here with my good friend and the father, grandfather, great-grandfather, whatever you want to call him, of this project that we started when, Chris? Back in mid-March.
Yeah, definitely mid-March when the tweet went out to our group.
Yep. Mid-March, Chris had the brilliant idea that we needed to start helping the Canvas family a little bit more. And so we started producing live streams, and we're up to, I think this is probably number 41. And, let's just call him Grandpa Chris. Grandpa Chris is back here to, to keep this awesome thing going. So today, in all seriousness, we're excited to have Chris back. He's going to talk to you a little bit about the power of discussions and take you much, much further past just how do you create a discussion. So with that, Chris, take it away. Everybody throw your comments, as always, in the comments, and we'll answer them throughout.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, good morning, friends. I want to say it is Monday. Let me double check here. It is Monday, May 11th. So for all of you at home not keeping track of what day it is Monday, May 11th. And I just want to welcome you to our morning session. Thanks, Mark, for having me on again. I had the opportunity to do a few of these sessions, a couple by myself and a couple with some fantastic friends. And so I really appreciate the fact that we're here again today and we get a chance to share. So today, our goal is to just talk about leveling up engagement with Canvas discussions. We're really not going to spend a ton of time on how to build a discussion because you could Google that and find out many, many ways on how to actually create a classroom discussion. There's some simple ways to do that, but we'll talk about it. I'll do a quick demo. But the goal today is to really kind of engage you as an audience and ask you how you're doing. I have no idea how many people are showing up today, but I want to engage you in those comments. I want you to actually get involved with it. What you see below is it's just a bit.ly we started last week. We started doing some professional development for the Department of Ed for Oregon, state of Oregon. And we've had some teachers jump in, and we've been using this Padlet quite often, and we feel like it's a pretty good place to kind of have people put down like how things are going, what are ways you're engaging students. And so if you do want to jump on that Padlet, that's totally fine. It's probably going to go ahead and then Mark, I don't know if you can even go ahead and click on that or take it and just put it in the chat. But so again, if you want to join our discussion, it's on the Padlet today. I know we're talking about classroom discussions with Canvas, but the reality is that some people don't have the ability to create discussions in Canvas. For some reason, they're either not using it or whatever. But what I do want to say is we are going to focus on classroom discussions with Canvas, but I also want to say I feel like if you could take away one thing or two things from today, it's if you have an opportunity to engage your students in some type of online space, whether it be classroom discussions with Canvas or some other tool, I think the things we're sharing today could easily be applied to those tools that you're going to use to engage your students with Canvas or with discussion. So that being said, it is part one. I typically tell everything to be part one because I don't know, maybe we'll have a part two. So I call everything part one. And I also like to call things a tasty snack because I don't feel like you're going to feel full at the end of this 30-minute session. It's really about a tasty snack, kind of hopefully getting you engaged, hopefully having you ask questions, and hopefully interested in trying to find out some more information. With that being said, my name is Chris Giles. I'm fortunate enough to work in Oregon, in the school district here in Oregon. I've been a classroom teacher for 17 years. I'm a TOSA, which is considered, it's called a teacher on special assignment, and Canvas administrator, which means I have the opportunity to not only manage Canvas from the management side, the application side, but also to implement technology practices in the classroom, help support teachers. And I work with an amazing group of TOSAs who also do the same thing as far as supporting teachers in this time now. So one of my favorite memes, you've probably seen this 100 times. And I think that this has become kind of like my calling card when I think about us moving to this online space where I feel like it's really challenging to just take what you've been doing in the classroom and just simply move it online. And that's why I think this meme is probably really, really telling. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I want to bring up is, do you remember I shouldn't say do you remember, if you're as old as I am, and I'm not a grandfather, by the way, even though Mark is joking about that, do you remember taking online classes in the years of the 2000s or even the late 1990s? Because what's interesting about that is discussion boards are not new. They've been around for a while. My master's degree was a face-to-face master's degree, But I had some places where I had to take some online discussion boards and get engaged. And there was a product that we were using at the time. But then I also started teaching university online, and I've taught it at a university for 5 years, and we still use discussion boards as well. But somebody brought up a point the other day to me, which was when I brought up discussion boards and using them in Canvas, their response was, oh my gosh, discussion boards were so terrible. Well, yeah, if we think about the way they were used in the early 2000s, like, and I said this is an example of 2006, there was a potential that they were probably after a while boring. Like you had to respond to somebody. Or I'm sorry, you had to post your initial response. It had to be substantive and then you had to go ahead and follow up with 2 other people. And it was just a way of the instructor to kind of make sure that people were engaged. And I think I can't fault them for wanting to have engagement, but sometimes it was so text heavy, there really wasn't a lot of true engagement. And so when this person had mentioned this to me, she was probably thinking the same thing I was, which is, wow, discussion boards back then were really kind of challenging to really feel like you're part of it. So when I taught for the university I worked with for 5 years, one of my goals was to make discussions, early 1900s, there you go, or early 1990s, So one of the universities that I worked with, my goal was to make discussions more engaging. And so I started adding photos. I started asking everybody in the class who was taking the class with me, because I was the instructor, to start posting photos of themselves. What did you do this weekend? How did things go? And one of the responses I got from, and this was a master's degree program. These were teachers who were already in the classroom getting their master's. And one of the comments was, you're the first instructor who ever asked me to post a photo of me or how things are going. And I led that by posting photos of me and my family in this discussion board. And this was probably around 2007, 2008. It was 2009 was when I started to work for this university. And so I felt like that was a really good move. It wasn't necessarily I was trying to be innovative. I was just like, hey, what do y'all look like? Because I don't know what you guys all look like. But the advantage to now today is that most classroom teachers who are in this space right now, you've already seen your students for most of the year, so you know what they look like. But that doesn't mean you cannot and should not still create engaging spaces for your students to engage in. So great article that we'll go ahead and post the article in a little bit, but a great article about humanizing online teaching and learning. And in the article, they really talk about being able to make sure that students feel engaged. And it's hard to make students feel engaged when you haven't enacted who they are and asked them how they're doing. And this brings up this favorite quote of mine, which is this. And this is not a quote that a student had asked, but simply a quote that I felt like was important for what we were doing today. And you can read it in front of you, but basically don't ask me to do classwork online if you haven't asked me how I'm doing offline. And I say that because I'm a parent of 3 students who had some teachers really engage with my kids. How are you doing? Well, as a parent, that's important to me. As a teacher, I also feel it's important for me to engage my students. So before I start asking you to do all this work or to catch up or complete assignments that you have not completed or that are upcoming, I really should probably take it upon myself to make sure I'm asking you how you're doing. Because the reality is that I don't know how you're doing. You are somewhere in your house, I hope. I hope that you are safe. I hope that you're healthy. But I feel like as a teacher, it's really my responsibility to make sure that you are okay. And I'm checking in with you. So I know I'm going fast, but so that being said, that's kind of like this part of, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about humanizing online learning, but just simply, I think it's important for us to stop and take a minute and ask, how are we engaging our students beyond just classwork? So with that being said, we've been doing a series here in Oregon with some teachers, and we just basically talking about how online learning is going and how to kind of help engage teachers and students in online learning. I'm not an expert in it. Please don't quote me in everything. A lot of the research I've done is from my own experience teaching online, being a teacher and being a parent. But I'm here to share with you what we feel like has been happening here and what has been working pretty well. And what you see in front of you is simply this: check in, engage, feedback, office hours, and reflect. And these are the 5 elements that we feel like are kind of 5 elements that teachers could engage in if you really are not sure where to start. So the check-in is simply checking in with your students. How are things going? And that could be by email or phone call or carrier pigeon or some way of checking with your students, communicating with them. And then engaging. How are you engaging your students? And again, I know school, the grade, the GPA, and all that is important, and I'm not going to downplay that. But Are there other ways that you can engage me as a student? And then feedback, are you providing feedback? And feedback, what's really important to me as a teacher is feedback is not always simply just academic. If you're going to create a discussion for your students, as a teacher, I find it's my responsibility to be engaged in that discussion. That discussion is not just for my students to put in their answers or to ask questions, but it's really my goal to be engaged in as well. And then office hours, and then reflect. So these 5 elements, I feel like, are really powerful, kind of simple elements that we can adopt to online learning. But why I like these 5 elements and why I like Canvas discussions is simply this. Canvas discussions, I think, can do all 5 of these things in a very simple and probably low management way. I'm not asking you to stop emailing. You can continue to keep emailing and communicating with your students however possible. But I feel like if I could use one tool to basically highlight all 5 of these elements, it would be classroom discussions in Canvas. And so today we're going to go ahead and talk about these 5 things and how you can actually engage your students using classroom discussions. So what I'd like for you to do right now, and I don't know how many people have showing up, 10 or 15 people, but I want you right now, I'm going to engage you. Can you just ask a question about what you see on the slide? That's it. Just ask a question. So what questions does this slide bring? So take a moment. Take a moment and just ask a question in the discussions, specifically about what this slide makes you think about. So I'll pause for just a minute. Usually I don't pause. I talk and talk and talk. Just waiting. We're going to see if we're going to have anybody discussion today. Okay. Why is the text so small? Oh, beautiful. All right. So who else can ask me some more questions? And I don't want any answers. Just ask questions. That's it. Love the question, by the way. Thanks, Jenna. I hope I pronounced your name right. Oh, I can't see the text question, but that's a good point. That could be your question. Why can't I see the text? Love it. Structure is more important than content. What's the difference between tell more and commentating? Oh, see, now here's what I'm getting excited. This is what I'm asking you to do is just engage in this slide by simply asking questions. It's just engage questions. Good. Why is the student support? Okay. I love it. This is exciting to me. Okay. So the purpose behind me having you ask this question and about these slides that I'll show you in just a second, but we have some people coming in. Why so cluttered? What's the point of the discussion? I love it. These are the questions I was hoping people would ask. As a matter of fact, you could ask many, many questions. So the point of this is, I feel like if you've never used a classroom discussion before, and this is the challenge, if you've used classroom discussions in your physical classroom, either face-to-face or you've engaged your students in the classroom with online, they have some sense of comfort with that. But if you've not had the opportunity to give your students a chance to engage in online discussions, it could be a bit intimidating. So the point of this whole slide is to simply say, I think a simplest way to get your students getting involved in a discussion is just having them ask a question. Post a photo, post an assignment, like it could be a picture of a math question. It could be a picture related to your content. It could be any photo. But the point is, if you've never had the chance to build up this experience for your students to get engaged with Canvas online, by just asking them a question, you lower this like affective filter. You give them the ability to say, okay, cool, I don't have to have the answer. I'm just asking a question. Well, I feel like the strength to this is anybody can ask a question. And the questions that are showing up right now in the chat are exactly that. Anybody can ask a question. And now I'm not asking for the answer. And I'm hoping that my students feel like, okay, my teacher's not asking for the right answer. They're just asking me for a question. I can do that. So now all of a sudden, believe it or not, I actually have an engagement coming out of this conversation right now online. Right now in YouTube or on Facebook or wherever you're jumping in, you are engaged in this question. And I'm hoping that if you stop for a second and think, did you ask questions now? Did you ask questions now? And by me just asking you to ask a question, was that a little bit more engaging, a little bit simpler to do than coming up with an answer? And hopefully that is the truth. So with that being said, one of my favorite techniques, and if you've never heard of it before, it's basically called the question formulation technique. And I'll put a link in the chat as well. But basically that simply means if you've never engaged with your students in discussions, a simple way of getting them going is just have students ask a question. And now as a teacher, the real strength in me having you ask questions is I can simply look at your questions and I can immediately tell, are you engaged? I can immediately tell, do you understand maybe the context of what I'm asking for? Or do you understand what's going on? I can make assessments right now as a teacher. And I feel pretty comfortable that right now, based on the questions I've seen, I can go ahead and see people are engaged. And not only that, but I can kind of look at how they're actually asking the questions. And then it helps me as a teacher inform, basically kind of like a formative assessment practice. What I'm going to do right now, if you're okay with this, is I am going to go ahead and put in the question formulation technique. So I'm going to send it to Mark because he's going to go ahead and throw it in here. But if you've never used question formulation technique, it is a simple way of getting students engaged immediately. All right, with that being said, let's move on. Oh, sorry, I apologize. So why engage with discussions? Real simple. We already talked about this. Don't engage me to do online work unless you've asked me how I'm doing. And the whole point of that is I could ask you how you're doing with the discussion. I can actually just check in. How are things going? So a few weeks ago, we gave a massive survey to our school. 5,000 students responded. And out of those 5,000 students who responded, you can see right now that over 45% of the students said they're using Canvas every day. Well, if all of our students are using Canvas every day, what is keeping them coming back? And how, as a teacher, can I continue to keep them engaged? And so again, I go back to classroom discussions with Canvas. I think I can engage my students in one platform, and that would be Canvas discussions, where I could ask you questions like, how are you doing? I could ask you questions like, just post an image or something that's going on in your life. And now I'm engaging my students. So if this many students are using Canvas in our school district at one point in time, then I need to make sure as a teacher, I really want to capture that. So big thing that I've learned, say no to just text. We had given out this survey a few weeks ago, and one of the things, and I'm going to give a huge shout out to my friend Nicole Carter, one of the things that I've learned from her, because she loves media, she loves images and videos and memes, is don't just ask questions with text. A few minutes ago, I showed you that photo of the student who was bored. It was just text. Well, it's okay to say no to just text. As teachers, as instructors, it's okay if we engage our students in other ways, using other types of media. So in other words, put photos in. So our Google form was simply what best describes your learning experience. And again, I know this is, like Chris, you're talking about Canvas discussions. Well, even if you're going to use Google Forms to engage your students, to ask them how they're doing, put pictures, use memes, use images. So the point is, it doesn't always have to be just text. All right, so again, you saw that picture earlier we talked about. This is a terrible example that I had put out there on purpose, was just so text heavy. It wasn't terribly engaging. And one of my favorite quotes, which brings me back to the why I'm doing this today, is, kids don't hate history, they hate the way we teach it, by James Lowen. And this is a quote that I think resonated with me years ago when I heard it, was because our students do want to get engaged. They do want to connect with their classmates. They do want to engage in their learning. But I might need to reimagine learning now. And so I don't want my students to hate, whatever subject it is that you teach. So how do I get them engaged? So again, I feel like the simplest route to get my students engaged is use classroom discussions. Stay away from heavy text and start using some of those other images that we could use. So what are discussions? If you've never used a classroom discussion, if this is the first time you've ever been here, you're like, oh my gosh, Chris, what is a classroom discussion? We'll talk about that briefly, how to create them and how to engage them real quickly. So two types of discussions in Canvas. You can usually do what's called a focused discussion, which typically means you pose a question as a teacher, and then your students can respond, and they're focused on just your response to that question. The other way is also a threaded. I'm a huge Instant Pot fan. I own 2 Instant Pots. And so because of that, I'm always asking questions on Facebook. Hey, how do you cook yogurt in your Instant Pot? Well, what's powerful about that is that's a threaded discussion. Not only does somebody answer my question, but now there's 5 other people answering other people's questions. And so, the difference between a focused and a threaded is simply this. Focus is just the one student typically responds. And the threaded is simply the student response, and then other students can follow up. So an example of my Instant Pot with my yogurt on Facebook, how do you make yogurt in the Instant Pot? somebody answers my question, and then 5 other people share their examples or their ideas or their questions, and then other people respond. So it's a really super engaging space. So with that being said, if you've never used classroom discussions, I encourage you to try one out, choosing either a focused or a threaded. The thread is going to probably get more engagement because now your class, your students are going to be engaged with each other. All right, Chris, what can I do? Can I just add text? Can I add some more stuff? Yeah, the whole point of today's quick webinar is simply this. You're not stuck on just engaging students with just text. You can add images, YouTube. You can pull content from your Google Drive. You can go ahead and record audio and stuff. In the example that I had used earlier, apologize for that. 1 second. Here, I got to find my example here. In the example I had shown earlier, I had basically asked people to go ahead and just engage this discussion. What I did was I leveraged Canvas and a Google Doc. So I wanted my students to engage in the question in a Google Doc, and then I also wanted them to have the chance to go ahead and reply down below. The point is, it doesn't just have to be text. It doesn't just have to be an article. You can pull content from anything, anywhere, and make your discussion. And like I had mentioned a few minutes ago, when you create a discussion thread, you simply go ahead and hit the plus button, add your title, and then add your instructions. And don't forget, as a teacher, you have the ability. Why does every discussion have to be just text-based only? Instead, throw something in there that's more interesting. Throw up a short 30-second video of yourself explaining what it is. Matter of fact, have your discussions, maybe your information in text, and then maybe read the text over again. So the point is, you can engage your students in Canvas discussions in a very simple way that's not just text. And again, I can go ahead and upload media if I wanted to, or record. And I also love to go ahead and add pictures. So maybe I want to go ahead and add a photo, which I'm not going to do, or a meme. So you can do many of this in Canvas. Okay, let's see. Let's late to the chat. Can you add the animated GIFs? Yes. Can you add animated GIFs to? Yes, you can add animated GIFs. And
it's,
yeah, go ahead, my friend.
Chris, it's GIF.
Yeah.
Just like make sure everyone knows it's GIFs, not GIFs.
Oh yeah, that's right. Peanut butter GIFs. Yes. So the question is can you add GIFs or GIFs? Yes, you can. Images. So we had mentioned earlier what are the things you can add to it. Images, videos. Yes. So you can go ahead and save a GIF or a GIF to your computer, and then you can absolutely go ahead and upload it into Canvas. So yes, you can. And not only that, but so can your students. So the point is, get your students engaged using Canvas discussions. Stay away from just heavy text. Use what you have in front of you, the images, the videos, the GIFs, the GIFs, the YouTube Drive, the other stuff you can. And then finally, build a suit. Make it your place for your students to engage in. You can choose your sections if you want to. You can choose attachments if you want to. My favorite thing is to allow threaded replies, which again is that threaded response. But then I also love the fact that you can go ahead and create what's called a graded discussion. And some teachers are like, whoa, wait, I have to grade it? No, but by clicking the word graded, it allows you to see the discussions in your SpeedGrader. It helps organize. If you taught as long as I have, going back over a discussion to figure out if every one of your students responded is a challenge. So by clicking graded, you allow the discussions to be neatly organized, and you can go to SpeedGrader and you can see, okay, did Mark respond? He did. Did Mark go ahead and follow up with other students? Yes, he did. And I can see that in SpeedGrader. So that's the purpose of SpeedGrader as far as grading it. You can definitely create it as an actual assessment. Again, no reason why your students can't complete an assignment or a task, turn it into discussions, and then you, if you want to, give an assessment or a score and feedback there. Absolutely. And then also available to and from. The one thing I really want to stress is this, and this is really important. If you want your students to engage in the discussion, put a date. It's really important because the students may not be aware that you created a discussion. And so if you, by putting dates on it, you allow students to say, oh, I have an assignment, I have something to do, I can actually engage in it. Yeah, absolutely. You can go into the SpeedGrader. All right, so engagement discussions. This is, I mean, I'm getting to the end because again, we're not going to spend a ton of time. If you've never created a discussion, it's as simple as, again, going into the discussions, hitting the plus symbol, and then simply choosing, do you want it to be a threaded or a focus question and then grade it and not grade it. You really have the ability to create the discussions probably within 2 minutes. But what's going to take you probably a little bit more time is how am I going to engage my students in this discussion? So limit the text, chunk the task, and then feedback. And I mentioned earlier that if you think of the 5 elements, checking in with your students, communicating, going ahead and engaging your students with something to do, feedback, office hours, and finally, it's called reflect. I can do all 5 of these things with discussions, but if I, as a teacher, am not engaged in the discussion with my class, I'm missing out. So give your students feedback right there. Engage them. Ask questions. Be engaged in that discussion. It's probably kind of a bit silly to expect our students to be engaged in a classroom discussion if their teacher doesn't show up at all. So one of the things I learned from teaching at the university, I taught for 5 years, was the more I was engaged in the classroom discussions, the more engagement I got out of those students. And these are university students. Again, these are teachers. So, these were adults. I'm not talking about 6th graders who may or may not have a connection or may not even have a device. So, and again, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, you could just do this and every student will be engaged. Please, we still have students. We have teachers who are struggling to get their students engaged. And that's just what it's at for equity, for lots of reasons. But I feel like as a teacher, I can choose to do nothing or choose to do something. And so this is where I feel like the classroom discussions is one place where I can go ahead and try to give my space for my students. Somebody had mentioned social presence. Absolutely. One of the reasons why I love discussions is because learning is social. And again, remember, task, purpose, and audience. If I'm going to give you a discussion, if you're my students and I'm going to give you a discussion, I'm going to engage you, what is the purpose, what's the task, and why am I doing this? And then use media, use the GIFs, the peanut butter GIFs, whatever you want to call them, the memes, the videos, the images. And a huge shout out to my friend Nicole. If you're not following her, she's fantastic. She is a huge proponent of engaging your students in spaces that are not just text-based only. All right, I am winding down, so I want to apologize because we're probably going to be out of time here in a few minutes. But with that being said, again, focused, threaded, pinned, which basically allows the discussion to show up. What I want to leave you with is a few things. One, I want you to maybe share your examples of how you've used Canvas discussions, because again, I'm not going to tell you the only ways, but I also want to leave with you a couple examples. And this was based on an article I had read recently called Humanizing Teaching and Learning. And in the article, they did something that I did when I taught at this university years ago. It was something that I was encouraged to do as an instructor. And that was simply create one discussion each week that was focused on the class. And it was focused on responding to students' questions about the assignments. And in this article, they called it a classroom wisdom wall. And simply it means, and again, you can choose to do this how you want, but if you're tired of answering one-off emails about every individual assignment you post, then consider a classroom wisdom wall. In that case, it simply means this. It's one space where you are going to respond to your students. So instead of students emailing and say, hey, Mr. Giles, how do I do this question? My response to them will be, that's a great question. Can you put it in our classroom wisdom wall discussion? And so the point of that would be is I, as a teacher, still would respond, but I'm hoping that the other students will also get engaged in the discussion. Remember I had asked about, I told you I love Instant Pots and I have 2 of them and I make yogurt. Well, one of the questions I asked earlier was, how do I make yogurt in the Instant Pot? I could ask the people who own Instant Pot, they're not going to respond to me. But I could also ask a discussion, and that's where we get the response. So what I'm saying is, if you want to curtail or remove or reduce the amount of one-off emails that you as a teacher or instructor are engaged in every single day, start responding by saying, that sounds like a question for everyone. Please put it in the class discussion for the week. And then as a teacher, I still would go back and probably answer, or I might wait until someone in the class answers. And the goal is, it's not just me as the wealth of knowledge. I'm hoping that my other classmates or my students will engage in the discussion and be part of the social learning as well. So if there's one thing I could give as an idea today, it's to start this classroom wisdom wall, which is basically questions for the whole class. Now, if it's private questions, that's an email. And then finally, weekly check-in. How are you doing? A really good friend of mine, Rebecca Larson, who's a fantastic teacher here in our school district, has done a lot with engagement, with discussions, and so have a lot of other teachers. So with that being said, asking her students to just simply share how they're doing and using GIFs. Explain how you're doing using a GIF or a meme. Go ahead and show me what you've been learning this week outside of school. And so she's engaging her students in a space that's just beyond the academics. You're still using the classroom discussion, but you're engaging your students where they're at. And that's that SEL part. That's, humanizing me as a student. Ask me how I'm doing offline, and then I'll feel more comfortable engaging in an online space. And then finally, academics focused. Absolutely. If you want to go ahead and still continue to do a discussion that's academic focused, or it's an assessment, go for it. But just keep it simple and make it engaging. And again, we go back to what we mentioned earlier. Use GIFs, use memes, images, videos. So if you want to go ahead and do that academic discussion, go for it. Just keep those things simple. As a parent of 3 kids, I will tell you from my experience right now, the lesson that I would have given my students in the classroom to complete in 15 minutes on their own at home, potentially with no adult help, or potentially with adult help who may not know what's going on, that 15-minute lesson I gave in physical classroom is now taking 30 to 40 minutes longer. So keep things simple. Yeah. Biggest obstacle is getting students to revisit the discussion and continue the conversation. Lisa, this is a great question, or a great comment. I really appreciate you saying that. And with that being said, I want to just stop for a minute, and I want to kind of honor the amazing conversation that's taking place right now. And so with that being said, a couple of things. Lisa posed an amazing statement, getting the students to come back and revisit, and a few other people had asked some other things, some other questions. So take a moment. I'm going to go ahead and look through the questions, but I'd love for you to share, how are you engaging students with discussions? What has worked with you, and how you're doing it, and maybe perhaps what hasn't worked. So take a moment, if you don't mind. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love for you to go ahead and respond with how things are going in your world. How are you doing discussions with students? And then we'll just take a minute to do that, if you're okay with that, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page because I have 2 spaces for this. There we go. We created an online Padlet for teachers to engage in the 5 elements we've talked about. Again, check in with your students, engage, feedback, office hours, and discussion. And like I had mentioned, I believe strongly that Canvas discussions could be used for all 5. I didn't do a whole lot of highlighting with the office hours, but it's, again, letting your students go ahead and ask questions in that discussion board. Maybe it's where that wisdom wall is. That's the space where you can engage your students for that office hours. Hey, I'm going to hold office hours, but rather than barrage me with emails, please go ahead and throw it in that classroom wisdom wall so we can go ahead and respond and see maybe the teacher's response, and then everybody benefits from that. So with that being said, give me a moment of your thoughts. What are you thinking? What are a couple possible really good strategies that you've connected with? What are some, if you're comfortable, do you want to share a failure? Like, hey, this didn't work for me. And then I really liked Lisa's comment. It's important to think about the time commitment. And then she mentioned earlier, her biggest obstacle was getting students to revisit. Have you figured out a way to make that happen? I'd love to hear from you. So if you're okay with that, Mark, we're going to leave this up for just a moment. And I want to have some people just engage in some group discussions, 5 topics. Yeah. Found that my students are better. I want to read this comment. Found my students are better. Oh, sorry, apologize. Understood what type of question or answer I'm looking for, and I added examples to the answer or to the question discussions. Ooh, yeah, I love that. Giving the students like an example. Ooh, I love it. The other thing too is giving students like a question stem, or even a sentence stem, or even a reply stem. Like if you're asking students to engage and respond to another student, ooh, if I'm a junior high student, I don't know. How do I start? If I'm a high school student, I may not know. So giving them an example, a starting point, like, ooh, here's a great way to follow up, or here's a good question you can ask. I love it. Ask students midway what is missing from the class and what should be covered. I love it. See, I love it. Asking students to post 7 times with different behaviors, but then I could not find and grade them. Oh, I love it. Good point. Yeah, and I think Teresa had mentioned earlier that I had mentioned that if you click grade, it shows up in the speed grader. Yeah, that's a really important point. If I am going to assess these, I want to make it simple. So clicking grade it for that discussion is a really important part. So friends, I think Mark, our time is pretty much up, and I was going to keep this super short. I cannot emphasize enough that discussions are a simple way of engaging with students, but when you create your discussions, take some time to think about how you want them to get them going. Yeah, awesome. So Mark, if you want to jump in, I don't know if you want to or how you want to end this, but I feel like this has been pretty good. I love the feedback. I love that we've gotten a lot of people who have shared the responses.
Totally. Yeah, if there's any last questions or comments, we'll give you a couple more seconds to throw them in there. Great comment, Lisa. You can always add a rubric to discussions.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so much that you can do. Again, I mean, that's why I think classroom discussions, I mean, I'm biased. I think the calendar is the most powerful tool in Canvas. And I think classroom discussions typically is the second most powerful tool in Canvas. But I'm also biased because I like to believe what I believe. So, oh, and by the way, I need to show people my shirt today, just because people are always wondering, do you work for Canvas, Chris? And no, I don't work for Canvas. Canvas works for me. And I know that my friends over at the podcasters, Canvas, what is it? Canvas casters. That's their tagline. And it's true. We don't work for Canvas, but we do our best to make it work for us. So that is true. So
love it. Well, thanks, Chris, as always, for joining and for putting out some really incredible content. Thanks, everybody who's with us. Big group today. We'll be back again tomorrow at 10:30, actually, with the Canvas casters.
Ooh, yay.
Be with Trent and Goebel, 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. Join us. Lisa Carroll loves the Canvas casters. So do we.
Yeah.
So do we. Thanks, everybody. Remember, you can see these things on the Instructure website. Go check them out. This is number 41, I believe. And there's been some really great contributions from a whole bunch of people in the community. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.